Kumler about Gemara to Bishvat. Today's daf in Moed Katan Daf Hey Moed Aleph. We're continuing to learn those things which you're committed to do on the Chalamoid, Shemitah, and Chalamoid. The criteria was it has to be to avoid a loss and less bother that it is, less tircha. So then the Mishnah also told us that your things which benefit the community you can do on Chalamoid. Umisaknin es kilkulei hamayim shebeshus harabim. That you can fix up all those public wells. If they got, the stones inside, you can filter them out, you can remove them. So the Gemara says, the Gemara infers, chatita in, you're allowed to remove the stones, of a chafira to dig a brand new public well, you cannot do. Says the Gemara, when do we say you're not allowed to build brand new wells? Even though they're a public, the community doesn't really need them. If the community actually needs them because they don't have what to drink, then I feel a chafir to dig brand new hole. You're allowed to, even though there is a big effort involved, but because it benefits the entire community, it's not only communal property, but it benefits the entire community. Therefore, it is permitted. So now the Gemara has a discussion about that very point. So you're telling me, you're telling me that you're allowed to even build a brand new pit if the public needs it. Well, Tanya, let me ask you a question from a brisa. It's the contrasts in the brisa that lead us one way or another, and we can discuss whether digging a brand new well, even if it benefits the public community, the public large, if you can do that on Chalamoid. Says the Gemara, but Tanya, the brisa, you're allowed to clean out all these different kinds of wells, different shaped wells, so yachid if it belongs to an individual. And the Ein Tzarech Leimen, I don't have to tell you, Sharab, if it belongs to the community, to the public. But on the other hand, the Ein Chayfrin Beire Shichir and Meide Sharab, you're not allowed to dig holes for the public. The Ein Tzarech Leimen Shayachid. Surely, to dig a brand new well, you're not allowed to, or a reservoir or a cistern, you're not allowed to. But and surely, if it belongs to the individual, you're not allowed to. Now, there's two possible scenarios here when we talk about the public. We're talking about for the public benefit, or we're just talking about a public buyer, but the public don't necessarily need it right now. My love. Some people say when it says you don't need it, it's talking about that you don't need it. Some people say when you need it, it's talking about you need it, but not straight away. It's for use right after Sukkot. That's what we call over here for public use, because the contrast for a private person, if he needs the water to drink, otherwise he can't survive. Why should he be able to dig it out Chalamoid? So they're saying it's something that you only need after Sukkot. So for Yochid you cannot, but for Rami you can. That's how some Rishonim want to learn. But Rashi just says that the public needs the water straight away. So my love, let's be a simple reading of the brisa. We're talking when we say public, we mean that the public need it, and yet it says clearly you're not allowed to build a brand new bar. Question on Rabbi Yochanan. He says, "Like, who told you we're talking about a case where the public needs it? We're talking about We're talking about a case where the public does not need it, and that's why you're not allowed to build it straight away." Now, remember, we're contrasting a public versus private. So, private also must be talking about where the private person doesn't need it straight away. So the obvious question is, if they're talking about a private person doesn't need it straight away, then how come you're allowed to clear the rocks for a private person? You shouldn't be doing that either. If it's just not necessary, why do it? That's going to be the most problem. So in other words, it is necessary. And yet by a rabbin, we're saying you're not allowed to build. That's a question of Yech. Says the Gemara, so you want to tell me you're talking about where the public doesn't require straight away. Well, that's a question. They can say, so what would the contrast be Gabe Yachid by an individual? That the Yachid doesn't need it, that's why you cannot build it. So there's a question. So how come Chatita Mishari, why does the Bryce allow you to clear all these different stones that fell inside? But Tanya, we learned clearly, and there's a contradiction to Bryces, and the only way to reconcile this conflict is that the first Bryce that we spoke about is where you do need it, and that's why the individual is allowed to remove the stones. But the second Bryce is talking about the individual doesn't need it, that's why you're not allowed to. And if we're talking about the first Bryce, you do need it, so the public also talks about when you do need it. And yet it says you're not allowed to build a new bar. Question of Yechim. Because what's the second Bryce? Because Tanya, another Bryce, these three different shapes of the pits of the individual coins in mind. What you may do is bring water inside them. You're not allowed to clear them. You're not allowed to smooth out all their cracks or cover them over with rabbi. But if it belongs to the public, you're allowed to move the stones. With shafis, you're allowed to clear them, flatten out and smooth over all the cracks. So here, l'chayra is you're not allowed to because you don't need it. So it must be that the first price talking about you do need it, and yet it says by a public you're not allowed to build. Even if you need, you're not allowed to build a new bar. Says the Gemara of Elamai, what do you want to tell me? The first bride is talking about Yachid Tzorich that a Yachid needs it. The Kavos, the Kabir Rabbim Shashman, and the Rabbim need it. And the bride comes to tell you, not like Rabbi Yechida, but that even though the Rabbim need it, you're not allowed to build a brand new one, a Chalamoid. But we learned in another bride that seems you can. Chavir Miyasa, Rabbi Yechida would be right, L'chayda, you're allowed to dig a new one. And how would you learn Pshat the first bride? How do I know that? Because by the time we learned in another bride, said, Boyd, Shichin and Maida Shal Yachid, if it's a boy, these different shaped borders, round or rectangular, or a cave with a cover on it, shal yachid of an individual, coins in mayim l'toicha, and you're allowed to bring water in it. The chaytin and you're allowed to clear the stone, that will shofin as it can, you're not allowed to smooth over the cracks. So the chaytin l'toichan, and nor can you go ahead and put rocks inside there. The Mephoshim don't really understand what it means, and therefore many of them delete through what I just said. What do you mean you don't put chaytin, you don't put the clear lit toichet in it? What does that mean? Anyway, you know, I'll put lime the b'shar rabim, but if it's a public chayfin oisa and you're allowed to dig it out, because clearly here you're allowed to dig a brand new public pit, reservoir with sodin oisa b'sid, you're allowed to smear with lime. So it's clearly allowed to. So we see that if it's public, you're allowed to. So how come the Tabraya says you're not allowed to? Must be talking about the public doesn't need it. So then how do you reconcile these two prices? So if the top price, the first price we learned talking about where the public doesn't need it, that's why you're not allowed to build a new one. So if a Yachid also doesn't need it, why is he permitted to extricate all those pebbles and rocks and everything else? We learned in the second price that you cannot do that if you don't need it by an individual, in contrast to a public bird. So this is how you should learn the first price. So you misunderstood. So that Rabbi Yechon is correct. If it's a public benefit, you're allowed to build a brand new boiler. This is how you learn pshat. You're allowed to dig out the stones of a yachid, and we're going to insert the words b'shiyachid tzarich lehem when an individual needs it. That's what he's talking about. Surely you're allowed to do it. It's a public boiler. If they all need it, you're allowed to dig it out. Because in fact, if it's a public boiler, a public need, you're allowed to even dig a brand new one. On the other hand, and these are the words that are missing. But when it says you're not allowed to dig a new one, so when it's not necessary. So the Brisa actually canvasses both scenarios where the public need it, require it, the public doesn't require it. When it says that you cannot dig a brand new one, it's talking about when the public does not require it. And when he's saying that a yachid is allowed to take out the rocks, is when they do need it. And the public, in the case of the public doesn't need it, you're allowed to build a brand new one. The Brisa doesn't mention it, but that's in between the lines. If when, and surely you don't need it, you're not allowed to build brand new. In fact, you're not allowed to even move the stones. Even clearing out his house. Rashi says, in fact, from our Mishnah, we can support Rabbi Yechon's view as well. Proof from our Mishnah. It says, it says in our Mishnah, you're allowed to take care of all matters that benefit the public at large. Now, the Mishnah actually gives quite a few examples. You're allowed to fix the water, you're allowed to remove the stones, you're allowed to fix the roads, the streets, you're allowed to fill up the mikvahs. And then it says, and you do all the needs of Rabbi. What else is left? So obviously, that's what it means. You're allowed to build a brand new one. Isn't it coming to dig a brand new one? That's the support. I can argue, the time you learned. You're allowed to go ahead and remove the thorns from the streets. It says the Brais of the Sakir to fix the roads versus the choice in the marketplaces, the lomadas and mikvahs, and to measure the mikvah. Any mikvah doesn't have 40 saw, you can bring in, make sure it has 40 saw. According to the halacha, it's it could be make shami rainwater. And we hold that's good enough for everybody. I have a Rashi over here says it's talking about attaching a spring to it, because Rashi holds that a woman of zova cannot just go to the ordinary mikveh we have today. They need to go to a mikveh of mayim chayim. They need to go to a mikveh of spring water, and therefore you need to attach a spring water source to every mikveh. That's the view of Rashi here, and which is one of the proofs they bring that it's not Rashi, because Rashi himself in other places holds that a mikveh does not have to be connected to spring water. It could be even make shamim, rainwater. So anyway, how do you know if they didn't go, but also if the rabbis and Chalamoy did not go to repair all the streets, called because if anybody gets hurt on traveling on the road, potholes, anything happens, it's on the shoulders of these rabbanim. Says in the passage that by Orei Mikla, if you don't take care of it properly, you are responsible. So therefore, so that's what the mission is when it says kol. It means to fix all these things up. Who said it means to build brand new boiras? Says he, what? How can it mean that? It says clearly on Mishnah already. He spells it out. They fix up the roads and the streets and the mikvahs. Then it says he still do all the needs of the public. What's it adding? What's coming to add? Coming to add building a brand new boir. If the public require it, you can do it. It's a good proof. What Pesach wants to know actually over here, the person who asked the question on Rav Ashi, didn't he know on Mishnah? He's saying maybe there's coming to tell you call to fix up the roads, but Mishnah clearly already spelled out to fix up the roads. So the top Pesach says, which is a fascinating thing. He says 4 lines on top. Inami, hi the maksha ha kusha. The person who asked the question, loy hoya masnita shgurim. He didn't know Mishnayis. Lo have a yoda, and he wasn't aware the God is brother. How Mishnah it says on the Sakis fix up the roads. Now we know that it says everywhere that every Amira had to know in order to qualify to be an Amira. He had to know all the Mishnayis. He didn't have to know the prices. He had to know all the Mishnayis. And here Taisa says that the Amira didn't know the very first Mishnah Moed Katan. Unless he's from the Chassidish Amoraim that didn't learn Masechta Moed Katan. You mentioned a few days ago that people never learn Moed Katan unless because of Avelis, unless you had to. So maybe he was from those. Let's continue the Gemara. Another thing the Mishnah says, what we do is a mitzayin is a chorus. You mark out the gravesite so that people shouldn't bring any of the food, the taras, the clean food, because it'll become tummy, and if it's kachim, you have to burn it and so on. How do you know that there's an illusion that you actually have to mark off and and highlight where these chorus are from the Torah? Tomorrow will be a number of psukim. So it says in the pasuk. It's actually in Tanakh. It says in the pasuk, it says when they have the war with Gog and Magog, they'll see bones of people, and the one has to say they'll put a C and a mark around it. You tell me it's my Torah and it's found only in Yecheskel. Less Yecheskel before Yecheskel came in the horizon. How did they know if it's from the Torah that they had no earlier? We already had the same Gemara in Tainus, so time anyone has back. Other didn't we learn from Yecheskel? We don't know from Moshe Rabbeinu, yet we know from the words of Yecheskel. It says in the pasuk, "Kol ben necher aral levar al basar." Anybody who didn't circumcise themselves because he was a hemophiliac and his brothers died under the knife. So he's talking about how pialach and allowed to circumcise, but no, can he do avoid the base of English? That's the base of English to serve me. Okay, it's a pasuk in Cheskel, and prior to that, how did they know that he was not permitted? How did they know? They learned it from Moshe Messinai, but also Yecheskel came along Yecheskel and put it on a pasuk. I'm here too. Gemara Gemidolei. Halacha much you've seen that you have to mark off the graves. But also Yecheskel and just recorded it, but it was from the Torah. You're right, it's from the Torah, but for a different pasuk altogether. It says that a person who's a leper, the Tameh Yikra, they announce that he is Tameh. It says twice or done the Tameh Yikra. That means the tomb itself screams out, I want you to know that I am Tameh. Mark me up. Highlight the place, the regions which are Tameh. Tumah Koidulei place separate. Uziel, the grandson of Uziel, Rabbah, the great Uziel, says Tumah Koidulei. The Tumah calls out and tells him Paresh separate. Says that's what the pasuk is coming for. Don't we need a pasuk for something else? So we learn a Sefer. We learn the Tameh Yikra. It says the pasuk that the leper is Tameh. It says twice Tameh Yikra. So we say Sorich Lahidiyat Sararam. If somebody has a shom is unwell, you have to post it on social media. Why is that? So that people can say Tehillim. So you can have numerous people saying Tehillim. And therefore, it says, Tomei, we need for that, to tell you that don't keep it discreet, don't keep it secret, share with others your pain and your suffering so others can daven on your behalf. And that can be very valuable. Im Kain, you're right. We learned that out, but for that, you just said lichter v'tomei. You can tummy call out that you're tummy. My v'tomei. It says twice. Tummy. Shaminah telling two things. Abai says from the following positive, Nilo says, Mitchell, don't place any stumbling blocks for blind people. So if you're not going to mark out the kvarim, a kohen might walk on there, or somebody might bring his taras there, and you cause them to fail, to become tamei. Papa says, Mahacha, from the following pasuk. It says, Omar, it says in pasuk, it says, Soilu, Panu Derech. Soilu is go ahead and make a road, and Panu Derech, they clear out all the obstacles on the road. Clearly, that what that you have to move you have to be able to highlight where the roads are, where they can walk, where they can't walk. Remove all the stumbling blocks from the roads of my people. In other words, mark out the part. You should make them aware of the road that they should be traveling on. So we're saying it's an allusion to making sure that you mark out the kvarim. Warn the Eden from becoming tamei. This is when the women learn out that they should be machmir on themselves, even a spot of blood, they're like a zova, but also use it for this purpose. Rashi says from here, "Shmartem es mishmarti." You should guard my truma. It said you should guard my what needs to be guarded. That two shmeres. Also, mishmeres mishmarti. Make an extra precaution to those who eat my truma, and therefore mark out all the kvarim. Ravina says from another pasuk altogether. Now, why we need to have so many different sources, I am not sure. But what is each one adding to the other one didn't, I'm not sure. So the pasuk, there's some derech and place the road. I'd end up I will show you the Hashem will help you. Be bringing on this pasuk, fix up and make sure the road is set clear for everybody. Anybody who assesses his path in life will be merit to see the salvation of Hashem. What do you mean assesses his life? Assesses mitzvahs versus avedas. Every time you don't do an avera, assess what you're going to miss out on because as a result of this, the consequences. It says there's some derech, place a road. I think there was some place. I love Visham, assess derech. Will see the salvation of Hashem. Rabbi had a student the whole yom every day every single every day he would ask all kinds of very difficult questions to Rabbi Yanai. Sometimes Rabbi Yanai knew the answer, and occasionally didn't know the answer. But it was all between the students and the Rebbe, so nobody was embarrassed because we'll have Baish and Lamed, and that's how they learned, very interactive. But B'Shavta the Rigla, when there was a Shabbos of Yom Tov, before Moshe Rabbeinu made a special takana that the rabbis should speak in public for everybody and lecture and give them and lay down the rules of Yom Tov, he would sit there, mom wouldn't ask a question because sometimes he might shame his teacher. So that Rabbi Yanai was so proud of him and how sensitive the student was, he didn't want to embarrass Rabbi Yanai in public. He said to him, this student there who assessed when he should ask a question, when he shouldn't, he will see the salvation of Hashem. Avoid my embarrassment. In other words, the student felt that to embarrass a person is much worse than if he doesn't know Pshat 100%. We're talking about now marking our graves. We learned we only mark out graves. You're not worried that you're actually going to come and touch the corpse or parts of the corpse. What we are worried about is that you might hover over it. That's called oil. So there's different kinds of there's different ways of becoming tamei. One is maga, touching it. One is masa, lifting it. One is hesed, which is where you cause it to move. For example, I pick up a board. On the other end of the board is something there. So that's called hesed. I move that other thing because of me. And then you have oil, which is hovering over. Now, hovering over a mess, or a mess hovers over you, or you share a common roof. We also learned that a goy, according to Hashem Yochai, there's no oil by a goy. Touching a goy's body, you become tummy, but not if you oil over a goy's body. So the only thing that we need to mark out graves, we're worried that you might be an oil. We're not where you're going to touch because people are careful the way they walk. But if you see limbs or anything else, you walk away, step away from it. But you're worried to be an oil. But our laws, not everything can generate that kind of a tumah of an oil, as we'll see in a minute. So what we learned. Ein mitzayin, we do not mark out a grave, loyal kazayis from a mess, if it's exactly a kazayis of flesh from a corpse. Now the Gemara is going to ask, the law of oil does exist by a kazayis of a mess. If it's slightly less, then there's no oil. But a kazayis is exactly a kazayis, there should be oil. So how come we don't mark out the gravesite? We'll see in a minute. A bone the size of a lentil, if you touch it, you become tamei. If you lift it, but if you hovering over it, you don't become tamei. When it comes to bones, you need a lot more than that. We'll see soon how much. Anything else which is going to generate tamei through hovering, the spine. The spine with all its vertebrae, it's one piece, but that's such an important part of a person's skeleton. So that there is oil, or valagugelis if the entire skull is intact, and you hover over that. Or if you have the majority, there's 248 bones, but it's the large bones. So like around the kidney, you have some of the large bones that make up more than 51% of the space, the mass of a person's body. Or the majority of bones, even though they're tiny little bones. Hames. If you hover over these, then you become tummy. Only then do you make a tzion around that cave, around that area. If you know everyone knows 100% it's a cemetery. You don't have to make a tzion because everyone knows to keep away from it. When it says that you're not mitzayin alavadoy, it doesn't mean not allowed to. As Taisa says, it means you don't have to. Or if we're talking about Yom Tov, it means you're not allowed to on Yom Tov to do it because you have no permit. Everyone knows you're not protecting anybody. Remember, you don't do any work on Yom Tov unless it's necessary. It's unnecessary. You want to do the rest of the year. Our mitzayin our is it will soon see what a suffix is. If there's a suffix, if there's an oil, if there's a body here, and you might be hovering over it, they mark it up because people won't know. And then by the time they realize, they might have to go ahead and burn all the taras that they did. We'll soon see. What's the suffix? Sicha is a price and base of pras. Now, the Gemara explain what that is. We don't make the marking directly on the area which is tamei, because by the time you're standing on the marking, you realize, hey, there's a mark over here, and you're ready tamei. It's too late. So you always expand that the marking should be outside of the tamei place. So you'll notice it, and even if you're standing on the marking itself, you still haven't become tamei. We don't want you to cause people to lose the taras, because sometimes you don't realize you're standing until you're already standing on top of it, and then it's too late. Unless where the markings are, there's no tumah there. Yeah, the Osmach can see it. On the other hand, you don't make the marking too distant from the marking tumah. Don't be machmer and say, okay, you know what? This area is 4x4. I'm going to make it 12x12 so nobody comes in real close. And this is very interesting. Why not? And you know why not? You are slicing away parts of Eretz Yisrael. We want that Eretz Yisrael should be accessible to everybody, not just close the borders to the whole world and anything else. We want it to be open to everybody. And if you are going to make any area that you declare tamei, people are going to avoid standing on. So if you are too generous in your area that you're cordoning off, you're taking away parts of Eretz Yisrael, and we don't want that. Interesting. So the half is Eretz Yisrael. We don't want you to cause any negative damage to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, says the Gemara. Let's go through now every single law. First of all, kazayis. Are you telling me kazayis of a mace tami boil? Well, Tani, we learned the following generate tumah by just hovering, and one of them is kazayis menames. If you have a kazayis of a mace, it is matami. So what are you telling me that a kazayis menames you won't mark around it? Says the Gemara on a papa. The reason is, you know why? Because if it's exactly kazayis menames, things disintegrate, decompose, and in a very short time it'll be less than a kazayis. But once you put a mark there, it stays there forever. And then people are always going to burn their taras, even though there's no oil, and you wouldn't have to. It's exact. The soiv mechser chaser. Eventually, over time, it's going to decompose, and it'll be less than a kazayis. And what's wrong? Mutav, it is better. Yisfu olav trumas akachim. It is better. Elfisha, it is better that there won't be a marking there. You'll stand, suddenly you'll realize you stood on top of, or you hovered on top of a kazayis of meat, and you'll look at it and you'll be able to see that it was a kazayis or not. And then you might not realize you're too late. And you're going to have to burn a couple of kachim for a week or so if anybody happens to chance on it. But yisru all of the oilam. On the other hand, if you are going to leave the markings there, people will continuously burn their taras or the trumas when it's totally unnecessary because no longer kazayis there. What I don't understand is why the Gemara doesn't say this, the thing we just said a minute ago. We don't want to take away from Eretz Yisrael, and once it's less than the kazayis, and you cordon this area off, you just took away part of the land of Eretz Yisrael unnecessarily, and that's what concerns us. I guess this concern is even a greater concern, that you're going to burn truma when it's totally unnecessary. Not a lot of burn truma when it's unnecessary. And that's worse than the fact that you're taking away part of Eretz the Eilu and Asrik is, you said that if there's a suffix, that's when we cordon it off. What's a suffix? Sicha means there's a roof extending from a base aquarius. There's a good chance that there might be bodies buried underneath this ledge, let's say, as well. And so therefore it's a suffix. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Let's say there's a tree that is from the base aquarius that has branches that's going out all over the place. And so on. The Gemara spells out. Sicha is ilun hamesach halaris, the tree that's spreading over the land. There's two ways of understanding. One is that could be there's a dead body there, or another one, there's definitely a dead body under one of the branches. You just don't know which branch. So therefore you cordon off the entire tree area. Prois is the same idea, but avonim pruas again, you have a wall fence and some stones are protruding, some are in, and the ones that are protruding could be that there is very high up. It could be there's a body under one of these stones. You know for sure there's a body on one of these stones, you just don't know which one. So you cordon off all of it. And what's a beis hapras? Beis hapras means a half. Pras means a half. It's a half of the size of a burrow, which is 100 amma. What is it? We'll see there are three kinds of beis hapras, as we'll see in a minute. But generally, a beis hapras is a grave. Generally, what we talk about beis hapras is there's a grave somewhere, or there's a corpse somewhere in this field. You just don't know where it is. It's called a sada sheneva b'kever. We know there was somebody buried there. We just don't know. It's a while ago. We don't know where. So that entire area becomes a suffix. Every way you walk, maybe you're hovering over this dead body. Now we learn if, let's say, you went ahead and you plowed through a field and there was a cave there, and Taisa says, interesting that today when we bury somebody passes away, we dig a hole quite deep, and therefore the plowshares will never come in contact with corpses where they are. Especially we have a box outside, but in Shalim, they don't put in a box, but they bury quite deep. Taisa says in those days there was very much on the surface right there. So if you had a plowshare that only went 3 tvachim, it would have crushed the body. So you plowed through a field that had a cave, had a beis hapras. Now we treat this as a beis hapras. In other words, a field that is a suffix, might be bones strewn around the place. The kama what's the general length of a beis hapras? What you normally do when you plow a stretch of 100 amas at a time. Says the Gemara, beis hapras. You tell me it's considered beis hapras, you have to cordon it off. But the law of beis hapras is not tummy. What do you mean? If you come across such a field and you want to go to bring a korban pesach and you have to cross this field, what you do is you look up on the soil to see if any exposed bones, and you just keep on blowing. You have a fan in front of you, you keep blowing everything away in front of you. So if there are any bones there, you shouldn't touch it or push it, and you move it to the side. So we're not worried about oil, because we're worried about oil. How can we? So what does it help you if you're blowing what's on the surface? Maybe something underneath. But we're allowing you to walk through the field as long as you blow. In other words, it's only topography that we're worried about. We're not worried about oil. We're worried about maga or masa or hesed. So you're allowed to blow, but you're allowed to walk across. So we're not worried at all about oil. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami Mashmei Ulama beis hapras nidish toy, and Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami says in the name of Ula that another thing he says that if you have a beis hapras, an area that had a cave, and everybody stepped all over it, in other words, even though the bones are all crushed and everything else, then toy you can walk right across it. No, but what does that help? Maybe you'll be in oil. You'll be hovering over some dead body there. So beis hapras is not also. Why does it say you have to cordon off a beis hapras? Why cordon it off? Cordoning is only for oil, because touching it has to be exposed, and you'll be careful anyway. And the cordoning off is to make sure that you shouldn't, without realizing it, you're hovering over something which will make tumah. Like cash, it's not a problem. There's two kinds of beis hapras. Besodish over bokever, besodish nechrish bokever. A field that there is definitely a cave. We just don't know where it is. Then we're machmer. You might be hovering over it. Walk across it. You have to cordon it off. But when we said over here that you can walk just by blowing your way, fanning your way, or if a bunch of people walked on it, they broke everything. That's talking about where the plow already went through the field. So there's nothing underneath there. There's nothing intact. Everything was crushed. It's only a question of touching something, because we know when touching a bone the size of a lentil is already, of a barley is already a problem. So that's why by blowing across is good enough, or shenidish is good enough. Different kinds of base of pras. But when we say now, but I say here that base of pras, that you have to go ahead and cordon it off, it's talking about a base of pras where the cave is still intact. You just know where it is. Says the Gemara, we're talking about? So with Sada, you're telling me, so when we say over here that a base of pras, you can just blow your way and walk across for a Korban Pesach, you're calling it a base of pras. I would have thought that's not called a base of pras anymore. It's not a suffix really anymore. With Sada, Shenech became a base of pras Karila, you call that a base of pras. The Gemara says that's in, because base of pras is a generic term. But Tanakh, we learned in the Mishnah, Shloisha base of pras. In fact, there are 3 different kinds of base of pras that people who eat truma shouldn't walk across unless they do something about it. One is Sadasha Ava Bakever, a field that had a cave and lost it, and that you should cordon off because you might be oil hovering over it. Then you have a Sadasha Nechel Bakever, a field that was plowed through. Over here, we're not worried about oil anymore, hovering over anything because everything was crushed. Water you might come in contact. So if you blow your way across, you're allowed to, or if it's been trampled by multitudes of people, then we know everything's crushed. It's very tiny size, you don't have to worry anymore. And the third one is Stei Says the Gemara, what's that one? It's a field. This is a field that people who brought dead from far away. They would bring, their foreign Chevra Kadisha. They would bring it right outside the town, and they would leave the mason there, and then the local would take the mace and bury it locally. But it could be because it's been traveling for a while that some limbs already have decomposed, it might even fall down, and nobody really is taking care of it. Each group of Chevra Kadisha think that the other Chevra Kadisha will be responsible to take care of it. So there might be limbs strewn about. That's also that little field where they used to bring the mason is called a base of pras as well. The time of my why because the age Bailim, we were worried about it. Each one thinks that the other one will take care and check out for any limbs that might have fallen down and so on. So the Gemara. So what are you telling me? That when do we have to cordon it off? It's a field that has a cave, you just know where it is. But if it's a field that was plowed through, you don't have to cordon it off anymore because there's no oil, everything is crushed to tiny pieces, no oil anymore. You just have to be careful when you walk. So what's on the surface. So you blow everything in front away aside. That's in front of you, and you can walk across. Or you can rely if it was trampled by the multitudes. Says the Gemara, you tell me a field that was plowed through. You don't have to mark it off. But Tanya, let me ask you a question. We learned is if you found a field that was clearly cordoned off, and you don't know what is it? Are we talking about here a field that has a cave, you know where it is, or a field that was plowed through, and therefore it's sufficient just to blow you everything in front of you and walk across? Because this is the only way to get to the next side. You're a coin, and you don't know if you're allowed to cross there or not. Right? So in other words, we see clearly from here, you have to entertain the possibility that even though it's cordoned off, it's a field that nechresh b'kever. It's a field that was plowed through. And you just said a minute ago that that a field that was plowed through, you don't have to bother cordoning off. We'll come back to that in a minute. So how can you tell? So what do? You don't know what kind of field it is. So he says there's a way of telling. Then you do matiba. So this is what you do. Yes, but if there are a number of trees there in the field, we'll soon see where the trees are positioned. But you do definitely you have to plow around the field, around the trees, and because you have to plow around the trees, and obviously if there was a cave there, it was plowed through. This will be treated as a field that was plowed through, so you can rely on blowing everything in front of you and cross and go across. And it's not matame ba'il anymore. So we see clearly from here that even though it's a field that was plowed through, you cordon it off. Rabbi Yehuda says we don't rely on that test because Achi Hesham Zokin or Talmud, you have to wait till there's an older person who remembers, what happened here. Was it first a basic chorus? Was it first trees there? What happened? A Talmud or a student that knows everything. Not everyone is aware exactly the circumstances of the situation. So it's a question. I'm going to papa. Ki Tanya no. A field that was plowed through, you don't have to cordon off. What's the case over here? Here we're talking about a field that had a cave initially. And the question is, if later, a couple of years later, did they plow through the field? Even though initially it was a field that had a cave, so they cordoned it off. Remember, once you cordon it off, it remains there. The signs are always there. But maybe later on, they plowed through it. We're talking about a field that had a cave. I knew the first they marked it off, cordoned it off. Now the question is what's the situation today? Yes, but there are trees today, but you don't know for a fact they plow through it, and therefore you cross it by being careful. And anybody learned this, but there are no trees, there be do a cave. It never changed, it's still the same situation, and a kohen is not allowed to cross it. Says the Gemara, okay, let's just rest for a minute. Let's focus on these trees. What does the trees tell you? Maybe the trees, they plowed in between the trees, but maybe the cave was outside the trees. because you cordoned it off. You have trees, spread out throughout this particular field. So maybe between the demarcation line and the trees, that's where the cave it is. How can you walk across? So the Gemara. We're talking about a case. The trees are actually on the borderline itself. There's no space between the trees. There's no gap between the trees and the demarcation. So therefore, you know that the kvarim are somewhere buried in the middle of the field, and that's why you cannot cross it if it wasn't plowed through. So the Gemara sitting on the border. So the Gemara so maybe what's the problem? Again, they only plow around the trees. So the trees are on the border, fine. So around the trees, you can walk, but you can't walk through the middle of the field because of where the kvarim are. Maybe they didn't plow. So how can the Bryces give you a license and say, hey, if you see some trees, they cross? Why? Says the Gemara, because it was plowed through, but maybe they only plowed near the trees. Says the Gemara, we're talking about a case, that trees scattered everywhere, including the borders, but there's trees in the middle as well. So definitely they plowed the entire area, and that's why you can walk through as long as you're careful and you blow your way through. That's one way of learning. Or you by saying, we learned, remember we learned before, we don't make a large expansive area and we put a big demarcation around it because we don't want to take away any land from Israel and to deny people the right to walk there. So if there's a big area that's encompassed by this line all around it, it tells us that the entire area has kvarim there and has not been plowed. So the hafshin is Yisrael, not to lose Eretz Yisrael. We don't want that to happen. So therefore, since this demarcation is next to the trees, surely the tumah is between the trees, and therefore it must be right next to the trees. Because if the tumah is in the middle of the field, why in the world would you put the tziyun, the demarcation, outside the trees, so far away? You're not allowed to take away excess land to make the soil is no need. You would have made the tziyun right in the middle of the field. So it must be that the kvarim are near the trees and they will plow through, and that's why you let it walk the entire field. And the Gemara concludes. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, we don't rely on anybody. You have to wait for an older person or a Talmud. Not everyone is an expert. Abaye says a very interesting thing about rabbis. From here we learn another fascinating thing, that a rabbi is not somebody who locks himself up in an ivory tower and learns all day and has no idea what's going on in the community. Any rabbi, the Ika b'masa, that functioning in a town, Kol mili de masa, everything that pertains, that's relevant to this city, the gashmias of the people of the city, not just the ruchnias, alei ramya. The rabbi has to know what's going on, and therefore, if somebody wants to know anything about a town, not just how many ruchnias things is the meat kosher or not, but anything about the town, the people need money, the people have parnasa, anything, the Rav has to be involved and know what's going on. That's a true Rav. Okay, well, that will stop here. We'll continue tomorrow in